On a warm January afternoon in 1919, the people of Boston's North End heard a sound like machine gun fire. Then the ground shook. Then a wall of liquid, 25 feet tall, came around the corner at 35 miles per hour. It wasn't water. It was 2.3 million gallons of molasses, weighing an estimated 13,000 tons. In the next few minutes, 21 people would be dead, and the company responsible would spend the next 6 years trying to convince a judge it wasn't their fault. This is the story of the deadliest sugar in American history, and the 6-year fight to figure out who was to blame. It was January 15th, 1919, a Wednesday. Boston was unusually warm for winter, nearly 40 degrees Fahrenheit, a sharp swing from the freezing temperatures just days before. In the North End, a dense working-class neighborhood filled with Italian and Irish immigrant families, people were going about a normal afternoon. Lunch carts were parked along Commercial Street. Children played near the waterfront. At the fire station next door, off-duty, firefighters were relaxing after their meal, unaware of what was about to happen 20 feet away. The North End was one of the most crowded neighborhoods in the country at the time, packed with recent immigrants who worked the docks, the factories, and the produce markets nearby. It was exactly the kind of neighborhood where a company might assume nobody with power was paying close attention. That assumption would matter later. Looming over the neighborhood was a massive steel tank, 50 feet tall and 90 feet wide, owned by the Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of the United States Industrial Alcohol Company. It held over 2 million gallons of molasses, shipped in from the Caribbean, and destined to be distilled into industrial alcohol, first for munitions during the First World War, and increasingly as Prohibition approached for rum. Nobody in the neighborhood thought twice about the tank. It had been there since 1915, but the tank had a secret that its own workers already knew. The tank had been built in a rush. Wartime demand for industrial alcohol was surging, and United States Industrial Alcohol wanted it operational fast. The man overseeing construction was Arthur Gell, the company's treasurer. He had no training in architecture or engineering. There was no independent safety test before the tank was filled for the first time. There wasn't even a basic structural review. The consequences showed almost immediately. Neighbors reported the tank groaning audibly. It leaked so constantly that the company's solution was to paint it brown, matching the color of the molasses so the leaks would be less visible. Children in the neighborhood reportedly collected the leaking molasses in cups to take home. At least one employee tried to warn the company. According to accounts from workers at the time, a laborer once brought a piece of steel shard from the tank's wall directly into the treasurer's office as physical proof that something was wrong. Arthur Gell's reported response was that he didn't know what the worker expected him to do. Since the tank was still standing, it was still standing, until it wasn't. At 12:30 p.m. on January 15th, the tank failed catastrophically. It didn't simply leak. It ruptured along its full height, hurling massive shards of steel through the air and releasing its entire contents in a matter of seconds. Witnesses described chaos that made no sense in the moment. Martin Clougherty, who lived nearby, later said he heard a deep rumble before he found himself waking up in several feet of molasses. Another resident, Robert Burnett, said his first thought was that an elevated train had derailed until he looked out his window and saw what he described as a great black wave rolling toward him. The wave, estimated at 25 feet high at its peak, moved through the streets at roughly 35 miles per hour, faster than a person could run. It crushed buildings. It lifted a section of the elevated railway off its tracks. It knocked the nearby fire station clean off its foundation, trapping the off-duty firefighters inside. As the structure collapsed around them, what made this disaster uniquely horrifying was the substance itself. Molasses is roughly 1.5 times denser than water, and the frigid air that followed the warm afternoon began thickening it almost immediately, turning it into something closer to wet cement. Once it caught a person, it did not let go. Survivors described being pinned by the arms, the syrup filling their mouths and noses as they struggled. Rescue crews, including police and medics, arrived within minutes but had to wade through molasses that, in places, reached their waists. Firefighters eventually used salt water pumped from the harbor to try to cut through the syrup and clear the streets, a process that took days. Basements and warehouses along Commercial Street stayed filled with hardened molasses, long after the streets themselves were passable again. It took days to recover all the victims because the hardening syrup swallowed both evidence and bodies. Boston Harbor itself reportedly ran brown with molasses for months afterward, and residents said the smell lingered in the neighborhood for decades, especially on hot summer days. In total, 21 people died, some drowned, some crushed by debris or collapsing buildings. More than 150 people were injured. Property damage across the neighborhood would amount to roughly $100 million in today's money. In the aftermath, United States Industrial Alcohol tried to blame the disaster on anarchist bombers. It was a convenient story in 1919 at the height of the Red Scare, when Boston had a reputation as a hotbed of radical activity, and anti-immigrant, anti-anarchist sentiment was running high. But victims and their families weren't convinced, and neither eventually was the court. A total of 119 lawsuits were filed against the company, later combined into a single sprawling legal proceeding, led in part by a young Boston lawyer named Dudley Dorr. The case, formerly known as Dorr versus United States Industrial Alcohol, would become one of the longest and most complex trials in Massachusetts history. The Massachusetts Superior Court appointed Colonel Hugh W. Ogden, a Harvard-educated lawyer and World War I veteran, to serve as auditor and weigh the evidence. Over nearly 5 years, Ogden heard testimony from hundreds of witnesses, examined over 1,500 exhibits, and reviewed engineering analysis on both sides. Closing arguments alone reportedly took 11 weeks. In April of 1925, Ogden delivered his ruling. He found no evidence whatsoever of sabotage. Instead, he concluded that the tank's construction had never been properly tested or reviewed, and that United States Industrial Alcohol was directly responsible. The company was ordered to pay roughly $628,000 in damages, equivalent to around $8 million today. The Great Molasses Flood directly reshaped how buildings and industrial structures were approved in Massachusetts. New regulations required engineers and architects to sign off on construction calculations, and for those calculations to be independently verified before a structure could be built or filled. Many historians point to this case as a foundational moment for modern American building codes, ones that engineers still rely on today. The case is still taught in engineering ethics courses as an early example of what happens when cost-cutting overrides basic safety review. It's often cited alongside much later disasters as one of the first times a company was held legally accountable, not just morally responsible for cutting corners on public safety. More than a century later, a small plaque on Commercial Street marks the spot where the tank once stood. And residents in the North End still say that on the hottest days of summer, if you stand close enough to the old site, you can catch a faint, sweet smell in the air. If you found this story as strange as I did, subscribe. Every week I dig up another piece of American history that never made it into the textbooks.